is a war. It's happening now. It will decide the fate of humanity. The time to choose sides has come. We are the resistance. We are the InfoWar.
Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Monday, September 22nd, 2014, and here are our top stories.
Tonight, Big Pharma giant GSK is found guilty of bribery. And climate change activists leave garbage on city streets. That's next on the InfoWars Nightly News.
Now NASA is coming out and saying, a NASA-funded university, and saying that we've got to pay the carbon tax or aliens are going to kill us. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not joking.
Well, there's a huge scandal breaking in the UK. Of course, GlaxoSmithKline is headquartered there, but they are a multinational pharmaceutical company, and this concerns their business practices in China, but of course, it sheds light on the ethics of the company. GlaxoSmithKline is now going to pay a £297 million fine over a Chinese bribery network. Translated into U.S. dollars, that's about $485 million. In other words, about $500 million. GlaxoSmithKline has been found guilty of bribery by a Chinese court and has agreed to pay a fine of £297 million. Now, that's about the amount of money that they bribed doctors with. They said that it was a massive bribery network that was uncovered, and of course, the CEO and others were threatened with a jail terms as well as large fines. It looks like that is not going to happen. We also had revelations of a sex tape of the CEO in China, the GSK CEO in China, a man named Riley and his girlfriend. It was mailed to 13 company executives last year. The Guardian also points out that a detective that was hired by GlaxoSmithKline to investigate who made that sex tape, who mailed it to the executives at GSK, that detective and his wife now are going to jail. Another reminder that although the CEOs and the executives may go scot-free, the minions are going to pay for it, just as they did in the Piers Morgan snooping cases. Now, in this particular case, the sentence that they're getting is 2.5 years in jail and about £20,000 for the husband and slightly less for his wife, both sentenced to jail. GSK had hired them to investigate why the company's then head of Chinese operations, Mark Riley, had been filmed surreptitiously having sex with his Chinese girlfriend in his guarded luxury home. Now, the interesting thing about this is that they came back, and in their defense, they said the majority of their work was done using public information. They said that they use internet searches, interviews, and site inspections. In other words, it sounds very much like what Google does to you and I. But the Chinese prosecutor said, do you think it would infringe upon your privacy if your husband or your son's private information was bought and sold? Well, quite frankly, I think it does. And I think that Google does that all the time. But of course, there's one set of rules for Google and the people at the top, and there's another one for those at the bottom. Now, the GlaxoSmithKline ex-boss, Riley, was not given a jail term. He was given a 3-year suspended sentence. Now, remember that it was just last week that we learned that GSK had actually dumped live polio into the water supply into a Belgian river. 45 liters of concentrated live polio were dumped in the water at a Belgian treatment plant earlier this month. And at the beginning of September, we learned that their Ebola vaccine was going to be given a fast track. And in fact, they began testing it on humans at the end of last week in the UK. But they're not the only ones who are bribing. Look at what is going on at the lowly 7-Eleven. You have 7-Eleven essentially bribing their managers to get their employees vaccinated with a flu shot. And look at what they're doing. They're not bribing them with hundreds of millions of dollars as they did in China, GlaxoSmithKline, but 7-Eleven is offering their managers to get 3 days off with pay if they can get 50% of their employees to get vaccinated and, of course, vaccinate themselves. What kind of bribery, what kind of payback are they hoping to get out of this? Do they think that this is going to reduce their downtime? Do they not realize that people who are vaccinated with a flu shot are far more likely to get the flu than those who are not vaccinated? Something that was pointed out last year for us by Piers Morgan. When he got his flu vaccine, actually he came down with the flu right away, which caused Alex Jones to offer a $1 million reward if he would get 1,000 vaccinations. And of course, he broke it down. It wasn't just the flu vaccine. He said, get 500 flu vaccines, 100 anthrax vaccines, 100 polio vaccines, Gardasil, hepatitis, meningitis. We'll break that down. I'll pay you $1 million because Piers Morgan was saying vaccines are not only effective, but they're safe. Yes, they gave him the flu. And so now we see that 7-Eleven is bribing their managers to try to get their employees to take vaccines. Doesn't this strike you as strange? There's a lot of profit to be made is the point. GlaxoSmithKline can pay doctors in China $500 million in bribes because they're going to make so much money if they can sell their vaccines, if they can sell their drugs to people who may or may not need those, for whom it may not be the best solution. Stay with us. Right after the break, we've got more news from the UK. Maybe not just fraudulent vote counts, but maybe some fraudulent promises. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Dr. Group. Today, I'm proud and excited to announce a new product to the INFOWARS Life product line. Introducing the first proprietary oxygen-based intestinal cleanser, OxyPowder. Backed by real FDA-approved phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. People are suffering from all kinds of digestive issues these days. All the toxins from the air, the food, the water, everything that you're exposed to on a daily basis ultimately ends up in the gut or affects the gut. My main focus was to come up with a remedy for this, something that's safe and effective that anyone can take on a regular basis to keep their intestinal lining clean. You have over 30 feet of intestinal lining that can be compacted, that can be toxic, that can be full of parasites, fungus, bacteria. What are you doing to keep that clean and flushed out? My recommendation is to clean your intestines at least 2 to 3 times a week to prevent the toxic buildup from going into your bloodstream. You owe it to yourself to take your health into your own hands and start cleansing your body today with OxyPowder. Secure your OxyPowder today at InfoWarsLife.com. That's InfoWarsLife.com.
I began to get into iodine a few years ago because it was helping me and my family so much get healthy and detoxify. I believe our research is conclusive. This is the best iodine out there. And I know this for a fact. Nobody else has got iodine based on these pure crystals, ladies and gentlemen. For a limited time, experience the ancient power of Survival Shield X2. Take advantage of this unprecedented 30% off Super Detox Special at InfoWarsLife.com.
Well, as Paul Joseph Watson pointed out today, over 150,000 voters in Scotland are demanding a recount, believing that the votes were counted fraudulently. But it may be that there were some fraudulent promises that were being made by Cameron, the Prime Minister. Cameron shifts tack on constitutional shakeup, reports Reuters. They say that Scotland will get more autonomy with no ifs, ands, or buts, said Prime Minister David Cameron's office on Sunday. However, many people don't believe that. Scottish leader Alex Salmond accused him and other politicians of tricking Scots out of independence. He made his allegations after Cameron, within hours of Scotland voting no to independence in last week's referendum, unexpectedly saying that new powers from Scotland, promised by London before the vote, should go in tandem with new powers for England. This raised the possibility, they say, of a new deal for Scotland being delayed or even thwarted. And so the question is, are they going to renege on the promises that they made to the Scottish voters to get them to vote no? If they do, what's going to happen there? But if he goes through with these promises, is he going to have a revolt in his own party? Will he be thrown out? Will there be a vote of no confidence that will come up that will cause even greater changes in the UK and Scotland? Now, there's a report from the New York Times about a case that came before the Ninth Circuit Court today that raises new questions about posse comitatus in a very different way, in terms of the investigative arms of the U.S. military being used against non-military persons in the United States. New York Times reports that a child pornography case spurs a debate on the military's role in law enforcement. A federal agent that was working as an undercover cyber sleuth logged into a large file-sharing network that was sometimes used by traders in child pornography. Now, he was working for the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and his surveillance, they say, could not distinguish military users from others. And the man that he helped to catch was a civilian. This month, in a sharping rebuke of the investigative service and the Justice Department that's generated wide interest in legal services, a federal appeals court in San Francisco overturned the conviction. Federal authorities said that it had shown, quote, a profound lack of regard for the important limitations of the role of the military in our civilian society. It's yet another reminder of how we are seeing the lines blur between the military and the civilian police force, how they're militarizing the civilian police force, how they're controlling them from Washington, but also how they're using the military as police. Remember that the giveaway programs from the Pentagon are only for law enforcement agents who have the ability to arrest and to apprehend. We also know that from the NDAA that they want to use the military to indefinitely detain people without trial. This is something that should worry us very much, that we have the military investigating people and then convicting them using civilian authorities. Now, Google and Apple have said that they will not turn over information about you that's on your phone. They say they've changed their software so that they're not even able to comply. But Wired magazine has said, well, you may wind up having to do that yourself unless you want to rot indefinitely in a jail cell. An attorney with the Electronic Frontier Foundation said, you can expect to see more cases where authorities are thwarted by encryption, and the result is you'll see more requests that suspects decrypt the phones themselves. And he says, by requests, I mean demands, as in, do it or you'll be held in contempt of court. Now, of course, this conflicts with someone's Fifth Amendment, where they would not self-incriminate themselves. But of course, the Fourth Amendment says that you are secure in your person, your places, your papers, in other words, your documents. Those are protections that we have not had for quite some time from this government. They routinely ignore those in many aspects of our life, even if you're flying on a plane. So don't expect to get those protections. Of course, legally, they could get your information with the Fourth Amendment if they suspected you of wrongdoing, went before a judge, told them specifically what they were looking for, but they don't bother with that kind of information anymore. Basically, what they're going to do is use a rubber hose to beat that information out of you, if that means that they just lock you up until you turn that information over. Now, in other news, the Secret Service this weekend, after breaches of the White House security, the Secret Service is mulling security checkpoints around the White House. The U.S. Secret Service is having preliminary discussions about setting up security screening checkpoints near public areas around the White House. They told the AP on Sunday. This is a story on INFOWARS. Now, of course, they even found an unlocked door at the White House, so there's something far beyond just routine checks. That reminds me of when they had unlocked doors on airplanes around 9/11. They checked that. That would be one thing they could do. They could basically lock the door. Now, they're saying that this is something that has to be done in response to this threat where essentially a deranged person jumped the fence and ran towards the White House and got inside. He had a folded 3.5-inch knife in his pocket, so that represented a huge threat to the president. Now, in a second incident this weekend, we also had a 19-year-old man charged with unlawful entry. His car pulled up to the barricades, and although he did not strike the barricades and he got out of the car, he was still arrested and charged. Is this a sign of new heightened paranoia? Remember that it was back in May of 2012 that INFOWARS reported that the First Amendment is now a felonious act. Remember the Federal Restricted Building and Grounds Improvement Act that was passed in February of 2012 by the Congress? They did that quietly, and the president quietly signed that bill. And for many of us, we were concerned that the Secret Service was going to be used to stifle protests, as it appears that they may very well now do in front of the White House. Now they will use this incident of one man running across the White House lawn. They will use that essentially to shut down protests, I believe. Now, the punishment that was enacted into law is a fine and or 10 years in prison, both if they say that you possess a deadly weapon, and they said that he had a 3.5-inch folded knife in his pocket. So it appears that he's in for a very long stretch. But what we were concerned about at the time is that the way the law is written, it can be used to stifle any kind of protest or dissent by the Secret Service anywhere they wish.